Sayram, everyone. It's wonderful to see all of you here, and we hope this will be a dynamic conversation that will include some of you. Auntie Pragna will also be joining us later on, so it will be we won't just be hearing the two of us, so I hope you enjoy it.
So Shruti is, as you heard, has a great deal of experience in environmental matters, and so perhaps that's a good place to start. I want to start with climate change, because we hear so much about it. So, do you just want to tell us what's going on and what climate change is all about?
Yeah, so it's the big topic of the news nowadays, right? So many of you would have seen the climate strikes happening a couple of weeks ago. Maybe some of you were there. I joined the Auckland strike. Essentially what's going on is, if you think about the human body, right? The body's got limits that we have to oblige or be careful of. If the temperature of the body gets a bit too much, we get a fever. If the temperature gets too low, we get hypothermia. Doctors can correct me if I quote this wrong. But similarly, if our blood pressure increases too much, if our weight increases too much, if we exceed certain limits, it causes problems to the human body. So very similarly, if you think about the earth as a living body, as a living entity, it too has limits that we need to respect. And we heard Uncle Ganga speak yesterday about, following rules and regulations, and our Swami really strictly followed these. And what's essentially happened is, because of our excessive consumption, all the dirty energy we're using, the rate we're cutting trees to build houses and farm food and all sorts of stuff, we've exceeded the Earth's limits in terms of a certain type of gas. That means the Earth is heating up. So effectively the Earth has a fever, in a way, if you want to say. And if you think about, if I have a fever, I'm in bed and I've got a headache and I'm tired, I'm really not in a shape to be effective and to contribute. Similarly, when the Earth has a fever, you could say, it goes out of balance, and that shows up as fires, as droughts, as cyclones, as all kinds of issues that we're just beginning to realize as humans. So it's quite a crazy thing that's going on, and it's very much driven by our activity and our consumption at the very core of it.
Greta Thunberg gave a speech recently, a very powerful one, and she said to the elders, shame on you for what we've created in this planet. So Shruti, as a young person, how do you feel about what's happening? And people like us got 10, 20 years, hopefully more than 10. But you have 30, 40, 50 years ahead of you. What do you feel about what's happening?
It's an interesting question, because on one hand, I see myself and many youth in our generation, particularly in the strikes, we see a lot of anger and distress, and there's a new term now called climate grief, and it's literally a condition where you're worried, and you see the state the planet is suffering, and it really breaks one's heart. You see the rate that animals are suffering in the oceans, that trees are being cut down, ecosystems are being destroyed, and on one hand, it's a very tough thing to see. But I think on the other hand, there's a lot of solace in Swami's teachings and knowing this is Maya. And Maya feels really real, which is why I still really feel the pain of the earth. But knowing at least, and the knowledge that it's an illusion, and that this external pollution is a reflection of my inner pollution, and that actually I can change this by purifying myself, gives me a lot of freedom, and gives me a lot of hope, and gives me a lot of empowerment. So I, on one hand, definitely feel a bit concerned, and when the Maya's strong, quite worried. But on the other hand, feel very hopeful when I see Swami's teachings. But on this point, Uncle, people often in my generation say, it's the generations before that have done this and created a problem, and they've consumed too much and had these very big economies. I'm curious, as someone who's been with Swami for many, many years, what actually is going on beneath the surface, and what's the real roots of this problem, and what do you know that Swami said about this?
Swami has been talking about protecting the earth for many, many years. In fact, if you go back to his discourses 30, 40 years ago, he was already alluding to it. We had a Go Green conference in July 2018 in Puttaparthi, and we produced a book called The Nature Book, and I'd encourage all of you to read it. You'll find it on satyasai.org, and there's a lot of information in it, starting with Swami's teachings. And one of the easy sort of formula that one may think about from a spiritual perspective is what was described as God, nature, and man, where it is, Swami said, nature is a manifestation of the will of God, and that God permeates this whole creation. And man is part of that. And the difficulty seems to be that man has lost his reverence for nature, for that creation of God. So there is a certain hypocrisy, I'm sorry to say, where on the one hand we say we love God, and on the other hand we tend to exploit his creation simply for our pleasure. And that's, if man can sort of realign himself to that trinity of God, nature, and man, where he sees God everywhere and he sees the need to consume moderately, then there can be some rejuvenation of the planet and that whole relationship between God, nature, and man. When I was about 6 months prior to the conference, I spent a little bit of time and put a paper together called Mother Earth, and it was really an interfaith paper. And my research got me to understand that, in fact, all the religions, and I mean all the religions, speak about the creation being a gift of God. And in Christianity, in Islam, Judaism, they speak about man's role and responsibility towards his creation. Hinduism goes a bit further, because Hinduism not only speaks about man as a custodian and having responsibility, but it speaks about that oneness and everything in God. So you really don't divorce yourself from creation, you are one with creation. And I think if we take up that role and are conscious of it, then so many things flow from it. If you look at the source of a lot of the problems, and Swami talked about, is too much consumption. And if you look at Gita, one of the primary points of Gita is that your desires are the source of all your miseries. And so we really need to look at this consumption. And unfortunately, the consumption predominantly in the last 30 years has been from the Western Hemisphere. And so a lot of the problems we see, not all, but a lot of the problems we see is due to that. Now think about this. In Asia you have two huge giants. You have China and you have India. And both of these countries have middle classes who want to live the American dream. Now, if this planet is in this state because one part of the world has lived the so-called American dream, what happens to the planet when China and India also decide they want to live the American dream, and our planet just cannot sustain it? We talk about human values. We talk about righteousness, where the rich consume so much and the poor suffer. You talk about the way we treat animals. So our values are extremely important in this consideration.
Two thoughts that came up listening to you, Uncle. One, it's interesting here being in New Zealand, because whilst we have the influence of the West, our Māori culture also is really beautiful. So many of you will know the Māori have a principle called kaitiakitanga, which essentially means guardianship. And in their worldview, we are not separate from the earth. And they don't even say, this concept of ownership doesn't even exist. It's where the treaty disputes came from, where the West said, you can own land. And in the Māori context, you are part of the land, and the land, if anything, owns us. So there is no concept of even separation. So I think there's a lot of inspiration we in New Zealand can take from the Māori. The other thought, I was reading a discourse recently where Swami said the decline in water in the earth. So we've got water scarcity, not so much here in New Zealand, we're very lucky, but those of you who've got family in India or have been there in South Africa will know there's huge water shortages in many countries. Swami said the decline in water is due to the decline in dharma in man's heart. And that really struck me, because how can the decline in my dharma be leading to the water crisis? And it's a concept I'm still trying to get my head around. But the reality is only in purifying ourselves will nature find its balance. So really one thing Uncle's really taught me is the environmental crisis isn't a technical or political crisis or an economic crisis. It's really a spiritual crisis. And to solve it, the solutions need to be grounded in spirituality, not merely in policy or in business.
Thanks, Shruti. So perhaps we can take a few minutes and be a bit more practical and say what each of us can do. Because I can well understand it can be very frustrating to say you have the big corporates that are polluting the air, they're polluting our lands, they're polluting our seas, our waters, and what can we do? But everything starts with us. It is said, be the change you want to see in the world. And so we have to be true to that. So Shruti, do you want to talk about some of your inspirations from Swami were maybe guiding your life?
Absolutely. So I think Professor Gangadhar gave some beautiful examples of just the extent to which Swami practiced a concept like sealing on desires. So we heard yesterday about the beautiful example of paper and, you know, the vibhuti and how the envelope would be cut and not even a piece, you know, a drop of paper would be left. Similarly, Swami would not waste a drop of water. He would not waste a morsel of food. I've heard even when people have written letters and given them to Swami, you know, often when you write a letter, there's a bit of white paper at the bottom of the page that you may not fill up. Even every little bit of white paper from the bottom of your letter, he would take and repurpose. You know, we heard about the kind of life he lived, one piece of clothes. I mean, the irony is, I look at my cupboard and I'm like, Mom, what sari should I wear today? And I've got more saris than, you know, these Swami probably earned in his life. But I think Swami sets an amazing example where literally he owned 1 or 2 pieces of clothes. He never really traveled much. I think travel's a huge one. I don't know, for me, I'm guilty of flying and I really enjoy being in new places, and it's a challenge. So I think Swami's life and the extent to which he did not compromise is a real inspiration. And I don't think, again, we need to beat ourselves up and go, oh, I'm doing all these things wrong. But if we can just take 1% and small things and apply them, that's a big thing. So one practical thing, Auntie Shruti, who's not here today from our center, really inspired many of us a few years ago to start composting. And our own home, from producing, you know, bags and bags of rubbish, we realized actually now the rubbish we produce is so little because so much of it's food waste that we can put in the garden. And that has inspired me and others to get more into gardening and to grow our own food. And I found even in growing food, you see how much energy it takes to produce such a small thing. You know, like one broccoli, you could spend months looking after. And when you see the kind of energy it takes to produce food, you don't want to waste it, and you want to take care of everything Swami provides. So I think his life is really, it's a gold standard, and I acknowledge, you know, myself, there's probably many of you that are much further on that journey. But if we can even take, you know, one small thing, we'll be a bit more conscious of maybe at morning tea, even though I didn't like what I took, I'm not going to leave a crumb on my plate. Or at lunch, maybe I took too much food, but I'm going to eat all of it, and really be more and more aware of just how precious these resources are that nature has given us, and therefore, as you said, Uncle, really be grateful and revere it and see this as God, as our Brahmakrishna prayer says. And if that mindset can be cultivated more, I'm finding slowly but surely, next time I'm in India, I don't need any new clothes. Next time it's Diwali, I really need new clothes, you know, and I think slowly we can begin to downsize, and as you say, and then find a lot of personal happiness and freedom as well.
Okay, Shruti has the bad fortune, let me put it that way, of sitting next to a lawyer. So when she says she has too many clothes, you know, there's a legal witness to this, and I'm going to come back to Auntie in 6 months and say, you know, has she cut down her shopping? You know, we hear about Swami as inspiration. You know, he is the exemplar of everything he taught us. And the professor was talking about how Swami, when he goes into the interview room, he switches on the light and the fan himself. There's one story I heard which was, for me, very, very moving. Because we say he's our Guru and God. And so we need to take example from him and follow. And the story about the lights and the fan, what I heard is when the interview was finished, he would normally switch off the fan first, and then the lights. And the reason he'd do that is because when you switch off the fan, you still get cooling because the blades are still turning. And then he'd switch off the lights. So even that microsecond of saving, where you can get cooling if you switch off the fan first, you know, that is the level of attention to detail. Now, we say we love Swami, you know, and if we do love him, we have to do what he says. We have to follow his example. And so for me, for example, now when I brush my teeth in the morning or when I shave, I'm very, very conscious of the water I use. So the tap never flows. You use it, you switch it off. You use it, you switch it off. I'm in the office and we have about 28 barristers in the office, and so we have about 5,000 square feet. And the receptionist will go off about 6:30 or whatever. And anytime between 6:30 and 7, I will go to the main reception area, and they've designed the lights in the whole hall in the whole office in a very smart way. So it's served by 2 switches. So you can switch off one switch and every other light will go off. So what I would do is go into the pantry where the secretaries are gone, switch off all the excessive lights, go into the secretarial, switch off the air con when it's not needed, go into that main reception and switch off every other light. So that 5,000 square feet is no longer serviced by lights that nobody's using. So it's that little thing which Swami taught us which makes the difference. And ultimately, it's not just an environmental issue. For me, it is sadhana. If my Swami has taught me something, then every little thing I do is sadhana. So switching off the light is not just the environment. It is obeying my master. And it's that example and that practice which I think we all need to sort of, incorporate in some way.
And I'd like just to question a little bit further your motivation, Uncle, because sometimes it can feel like, why should I do something when no one else is doing anything, I'm taking all this effort and paying all this money to ensure that I don't produce waste at home, but what about the companies that are producing lots of waste? And I really hear in you that there's a deeper motivation, so why, just to push a bit further, why does our actions really matter? And what motivates you to act given the scale of the challenge and the depths of the Kali Yuga that we live in?
The thing is, we must not just focus on our individual actions. If every Sai devotee around the world brought changes, if the information we've put up on our webpage of environmental sustainability, I'd ask you to go to that. It's all there. And we've produced checklists for how Sai centers can have more green practices. There's even a particular checklist on how we as individual Sai devotees can change our habits. Now, if all of us studied those checklists and really thought about it and said, how do I implement these things in my life? Then at the very least, you have possibly, as a Sai devotee, at the very least, there are 30, 40, 50 million people around the world doing this. And we're just one group, because we must not underestimate the fact that there are a lot of other spiritual organizations who are also very conscious. There are non-spiritual organizations. So we must not underestimate the power of us as we walk together on this spiritual path. So I think it makes a difference. Do you want to talk about Swami's Sealing on Desires program as a very effective way of focusing on one's mind?
Yeah, so many of you are probably aware of Swami's Sealing on Desires program. There's 5 elements to it: not wasting food, energy, water, and time. And I think the real essence of it, there was 3 questions I once heard Swami ask in a discourse or an interview. When you want something, ask yourself, do I need it? Is it good for me? And can I live without it? And sometimes the mind will say, yeah, you need that. Yeah, it's good for you, but can I live without it? I probably can live without it. And I think that was just a very simple tool that Swami gave to, as Uncle said, restrain ourselves or catch ourselves as a desire arises. I think even if we can choose one area of our life to start practicing a sealing, that will then flow into other areas. There's this quote, as you do anything is how you do everything. How you do anything is how you do everything. So even if in one aspect we can have some restraint and really question, what do I actually need? Then I think that will set us up to begin to limit things in other aspects of our life.
Share her vision for the future, and I just want to make one closing remark.
Yeah, and just before we jump into that, Brother Shiva's been leading an amazing initiative to really hold a wonderful Serve the Planet Forum in Fiji in next year. So we'll find another chance to share more information. Come chat to Shiva, Melanie, or I if you want to learn more about it. There's an opportunity for all of you to get involved. So it's on the radar, and we'll find another chance without taking more time. But to your question, Uncle, in terms of my vision, the world is worried about climate change right now. It's arguably probably the biggest issue of our time and our generation. And we're so lucky to have access to Swami's teachings, the real root solution. So I guess my vision is for us as an organization here and globally for every one of us to practice Swami's teachings in our own lives around water, energy, food, for every center to go zero waste, for every center to be conscious of the lights, how many are needed, the fans, how are we traveling here, how much stuff are we using, how do we be smart about our decorations. And I think New Zealand's come a really long way, and it's a real, it's a big credit to Uncle Murali and others championing this. But how can we really live this completely in our own lives, and from that place begin to share it more with the community? And so globally really help Mother Earth find her balance, help her heal from her fever, and really be well and know that in her healing is our healing as well.
My personal vision is for me to develop in a way where I can actually live more and more simply. There is a belief that the more we have in terms of things, the more we have in terms of our relationships, in our friends, etc., we'll be happy. But the truth is, less is more. And living simply, and that's not just in our possessions, but it's in our thoughts, it's in everything about us. If we can just sort of downsize, I think the natural consequence of that is we consume less, we want less. Ultimately, I believe I will not be measured by the watch I wear. I will not be measured by the car I drive. I will only be measured by who I am. That is the ultimate test. And that doesn't require any baggage. So living simply, freeing my mind from all that baggage one carries, not only in terms of desires, but in terms of thoughts, judgments, ideas. If we can just get rid of all the baggage, I think our spiritual lives will be easier. The theme of the World Conference next year involves the idea of unity and purity. And I think unity and purity will flow if we live simply. And that's what my personal vision is.
Beautiful. My closing thought I wanted to share, and I would love to hear from you as well, Uncle, is the theme of this conference is action, devotion, and wisdom. And if we bring that back to the idea of nature and our environment and climate change, I really hope and pray to Swami that as we leave, each of us can find small ways to serve him in nature, be it through our actions at home, be it through seva organized in the center. I hope we can grow our love for Mother Earth, for Papatuanuku, as Auntie said, to really love Swami in nature and all his creation. And finally, in the topic of wisdom, realize that we are not separate from nature, that we are part and parcel of this creation, that Swami is resplendent in me, and Uncle, and every one of you, in the trees, and that, really realize this oneness on this journey.
So on the webpage of the Environmental Sustainability Committee on SSIO.org, you can go into global initiatives. One of the global initiatives is environmental sustainability. And on that there is a 4-page mission statement of the SSIO. So I'd encourage all of you devotees to read that and to understand the position the organization has taken. And the reason I would ask you to do that is because you will all go into the community, and there may be friends or family members who know you as Sai devotees. And it's important that everyone understands Swami's teachings, which is contained in those 4 pages, and understands our positions. Because at the end of the day, and this is the last thing I want to say, every single one of you is an ambassador of Swami's teachings and what he wants the world to be like. Every single one of you. Which means you have a duty to understand. You have a duty to share. And where the opportunity arises, to educate and to lead by example. That's our obligation as his emissaries. So please do read that mission statement. Sam, thank you so much, brother, for the opportunity.